Imagine a blue sky, cloudless, with the sun reflecting off the waves of the ocean, the salty smell of the sea in the air. Now think of a man, a millionaire, at the peak of wealth, driving through the sunny streets of Lisbon in his silver Porsche. A man named Philip Alves, whose heart, despite being surrounded by luxury, carried a void that not even the most opulent of mansions could fill. This is where our story begins. Philip Alves was the kind of person everyone envied. He had it all: mansions, luxury cars, gold watches, endless trips. But if you looked closely at him, you would see something more. A distant look, like that of someone lost in a maze with no way out. Because deep down, there was a secret Philip couldn't forget. He was sterile, incapable of having children, and that weighed like a stone at the bottom of his soul. The dream of a legacy, of leaving behind something more meaningful than his material possessions, haunted him every day. One day, while driving through the vibrant streets of Lisbon, his Porsche gliding smoothly over the asphalt, Philip reflected on the emptiness that consumed him. "What's the point of having everything if I have no one to share it with?" he thought, with a sadness that tightened his chest. It was then that, almost without realizing it, he did something he had never done before. He stopped his car next to a train station and, without thinking, decided to board the next train that crossed his path. Can you imagine that? A multimillionaire, abandoning all comfort, searching for something he didn't even know? The train was packed, so crowded that the air seemed to vibrate with the sound of mixed voices and the constant creaking of steel wheels on the tracks. Philip Alves, used to wide and silent spaces, immediately felt out of place. He stood, squeezed between ordinary people carrying shopping bags, worn-out backpacks, and even some musical instruments. It was a chaotic environment, a complete contrast to the ordered and luxurious world he belonged to. The human warmth and the unsettling closeness of the people around him made Philip unconsciously adjust the collar of his linen shirt. The train swayed lightly, and he held onto one of the metal poles, trying to ignore the feeling of discomfort. As his gaze wandered through the crowd, it was drawn to something outside, through the dusty windows. The Atlantic Ocean stretched out like an endless blue carpet, and the waves sparkled under the sun, softly crashing against the coastal rocks. Philip momentarily lost himself in that view, hypnotized by the constant movement of the sea, as if the ocean whispered a secret he couldn't quite understand. Perhaps it was the melancholy that pulled him, the emptiness he felt in his chest, or maybe it was the nostalgia for something he never knew how to define. As his mind drifted, he unconsciously took a step back. And then, a cry of pain and indignation brought him back to reality. "Hey! Is the ocean view so fascinating that you can't even apologize for stepping on my foot?" Philip blinked, startled. He quickly turned around, and his gaze met the face of a woman. She had brown hair, tousled by the salty Atlantic breeze, falling in rebellious strands around her flushed cheeks. Her face was a mix of weariness and determination, like someone who faced the struggles of everyday life with strength, even if there was a hint of wear in her eyes. Emma, that was her name, though Philip didn't know it yet. Days went by, but Philip couldn't get Emma out of his mind. He found himself thinking of her as he drove along winding roads leading to his mansion in the hills of Sintra, a place where luxury merged with an almost palpable solitude. The trees bent to the wind, and the heavy silence seemed to stretch across the entire property, yet even the natural splendor of the place couldn't dispel the memory of Emma. The way she had challenged him with those sincere eyes continued to echo in his mind, like a gentle, persistent melody he couldn't forget. But fate, with its peculiar way of playing with human lives, had different plans for them. And then, on an apparently ordinary day, the unexpected happened. Emma was still adjusting to the rhythm of her new life. When she accepted the job as a housekeeper in that imposing mansion, she never imagined what awaited her. Climbing the hill, she looked at the mansion that stood like a castle, with white columns, perfectly manicured gardens, and windows so tall it seemed impossible to see beyond. Each step she took made her heart beat faster, and she clutched the strap of her bag as if that could contain the whirlwind of emotions starting to rise. Elizabeth, the head of the staff, a woman with a rigid posture and calculating gaze, was waiting for Emma in the main hall. With a cold and distant smile, she guided Emma through the house and explained her future responsibilities. As they walked through long corridors lit by shimmering chandeliers, Emma tried to keep her composure. But she had no idea that the real shock was yet to come. Elizabeth guided her into a large room with windows overlooking the garden, where Philip stood, analyzing some papers with his brow furrowed in concentration. Emma stopped abruptly, as if she had come face to face with a ghost. Her heart seemed to drop into her stomach, and her eyes widened in pure astonishment. It was him. The man from the train. The distracted millionaire who had stepped on her foot and hadn't even apologized. Emma felt the blood rush to her face, a mix of surprise and indignation. She couldn't believe that this stranger was her new boss, and the irony of the situation almost made her laugh, if not for the tension now hanging in the air. Philip, for his part, took a few moments to realize there was someone new in the room. When he finally looked up and saw Emma, the surprise on his face was unmistakable. His eyes widened briefly before he regained his usual composure. He wasn't prepared for this. The woman who had occupied his thoughts was now standing in his mansion, wearing an expression of shock and disbelief. Emma struggled to maintain professionalism, but her thoughts raced in 1,000 directions. What was fate trying to prove, after all? How could she work for this arrogant man who had treated her with such indifference on the train? In that tense and silent atmosphere, Emma quickly realized that the mansion was not just a place of beauty but also a stage for power games and manipulation. And the main actress in this spectacle was Elizabeth. With sharp eyes and a smile that never reached them, Elizabeth noticed Philip's reaction upon seeing Emma and sensed an immediate threat. There was something different about this young woman, and Elizabeth, accustomed to having control over everything, was not willing to allow any change that could jeopardize her dominance. Fate had placed Emma in that mansion, and she would have to discover why. The days in the mansion followed a strange rhythm after Emma's arrival. Philip felt restless. Something within him had shifted since that encounter on the train, and Emma's presence in the house only intensified these feelings. He observed her from a distance, noticing her dedication to her work and the kind way she treated everyone around her. There was a light in Emma that seemed to illuminate the darkest corners of his soul. Elizabeth, on the other hand, couldn't stand what she was witnessing. The head of the staff had always harbored a secret, obsessive love for Philip. She believed that, having been by his side for so many years, she would one day be noticed in a different way. But now, with Emma in the mansion, she felt her hold slipping. Philip's smile when he saw Emma, the sparkle in his eyes, these things fueled a corrosive jealousy within Elizabeth. Determined to eliminate her rival, Elizabeth devised a malicious plan. She manipulated Emma into decorating Philip's room with a childlike theme, filling the space with the sweet fragrance of baby powder and pastel-colored details. Unaware of Philip's trauma, Emma believed she was doing something beautiful, something that would bring a gentle, comforting touch to his space. But the effect was devastating. When Philip entered the room and smelled the sweet scent, saw the soft colors and baby decorations, it felt like a punch to the chest. His heart ached, the trauma of his infertility returned with full force, and he was consumed by a mixture of rage and pain. Without thinking twice, he confronted Emma harshly, accusing her of mocking his condition. Emma, confused and hurt, was left speechless, unable to defend herself. What was meant to be a thoughtful gesture had turned into the trigger for an emotional crisis. Unable to cope with Philip's suffering and the injustice of the accusations, Emma was summarily dismissed, expelled from the mansion without even understanding what she had done wrong. The pain of being misunderstood and humiliated lingered as she left the place, tears streaming down her face. Philip noticed Emma's absence almost immediately. The house felt colder, emptier. When he questioned Elizabeth about what had happened, her response only fueled his frustration. That reckless woman went too far and had to leave, Elizabeth said with a barely concealed look of satisfaction. But something didn't feel right. Philip, still haunted by the memory of the decorated room, began to piece things together. The way Elizabeth had watched him, her sudden coldness toward Emma, and how Emma had been carefully manipulated to touch his deepest wound. It all seemed suspicious. He resolved to seek the truth. By reviewing some recent conversations and events in the mansion, Philip overheard fragments of a discussion among the other staff. They mentioned how Elizabeth had given Emma specific instructions to prepare the room, assuring her that it would please Philip. Philip's blood boiled. The injustice he had committed against Emma, the way Elizabeth had manipulated him, struck him like a blow. He knew he had to make things right. Philip found Elizabeth in the grand hall of the mansion, where she was rearranging some antiques with an air of self-importance. His face was grim, and his voice carried an uncommon coldness. "We need to talk, Elizabeth." She looked up, surprised by the seriousness in his expression. "Of course, sir. Is there a problem?" Philip stepped closer, each movement charged with anger and disappointment. "Yes, there is a huge problem," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I found out what you did. You manipulated Emma into decorating my room with a childlike theme, knowing exactly how much it would hurt me. Elizabeth turned pale. Her eyes widened, but she tried to defend herself. Sir, I only wanted to do something nice. That girl was clumsy, she didn't know what she was doing. She hesitated, desperation taking over. Philip interrupted with a cold stare. Stop it. I know you orchestrated everything because you're consumed by a sick jealousy. Don't you realize that with your lies and manipulations, you destroyed the life of an innocent person? Emma never did anything to deserve this. Elizabeth tried to approach him, her voice trembling and tears beginning to fall. I did it because I love you, Philip. I've always been here, always taken care of you. How could I let that woman take you away from me? Philip shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. That's not love, Elizabeth. It's obsession. And I can't allow someone so cruel to remain in this house. You're fired, and I want you to leave immediately. Elizabeth broke into sobs, but Philip was resolute. His expression was one of absolute determination. She knew she had lost, and her pleas would have no effect. With a pale and defeated face, she left the room, fully aware that her actions had condemned her. With Elizabeth gone from the mansion, Philip knew he had to find Emma and make things right. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for the future. He remembered that, in one of the few conversations they had, Emma had mentioned liking to visit a small park in the center of Lisbon. Without wasting any time, he drove there, feeling anxiety tighten his heart. The cool afternoon wind blew as he looked around, searching for any sign of her. And then he saw her. Emma was sitting on a bench, curled up in a thin coat, staring at a small lake with a sorrowful expression. Philip approached slowly, feeling the weight of guilt with every step. Emma, he called, his voice soft and full of regret. She turned slowly, her eyes reflecting the pain and hurt that still haunted her. What do you want, Philip? Her voice was a whisper, almost broken. He knelt in front of her, not caring about the curious looks from a few people nearby. I came to ask for forgiveness. I found out the truth about what happened. Elizabeth set everything up to hurt you and manipulate me. I was a fool for believing her lies and treating you so unfairly. Emma blinked, trying to process his words. There was sincerity in Philip's face, and his hands trembled slightly, showing how much this meant to him. I only wanted to do something nice, something that might brighten your day, Emma murmured, her eyes filling with tears. I never meant to hurt you. Philip gently took her hands, his eyes moist with regret. I know that now. And I hate myself for not seeing your kindness from the start. If you give me a chance, I promise to make it up to you. I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I'm willing to prove my remorse. Emma watched him, seeing the vulnerability of a man who had never shown himself to be so human. A heavy silence lingered between them until she sighed deeply. I don't know, Philip, but maybe we can start over, slowly. A hopeful smile spread across his face. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. From that day in the park, when Philip asked Emma for forgiveness and she reluctantly accepted his offer of friendship, something began to blossom between them. It wasn't immediate or rushed, but it was genuine. Philip made it clear from the start, he didn't want Emma to return as his employee. He wanted them to be friends, to truly get to know each other without the barriers of hierarchy or formality. I want to know you for real, Emma. Not as someone who works for me, but as a friend, Philip said with a hopeful smile. Emma looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity, the change. She agreed, though she still carried a bit of caution. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, this friendship grew into a deep and unbreakable bond. They started meeting often, whether for long walks through the streets of Lisbon or for coffee dates, sharing stories about their lives. One afternoon, while sitting at a cafe near the coast, the topic of their first meeting inevitably came up. Emma laughed, recalling how Philip had stepped on her foot on the train. I'll never forget how angry I was that day. Emma joked, her eyes sparkling with joy. Little did I know that the man who made me so furious would become my friend. Philip smiled, but there was a hint of seriousness on his face. You know, I never told you what led me to get on that train that day, did I? Emma shook her head, curious. No, you didn't. I always thought it was just a strange coincidence. Philip took a deep breath, looking out at the horizon. That day, I felt more lost than ever. My whole life, I've been surrounded by wealth, but inside, there was an immense emptiness. The fact that I'm sterile left me feeling like I could never leave a legacy, never have something that truly mattered. So I decided to break away from my routine, do something out of the ordinary, like getting on a train and seeing where it would take me. He looked at Emma, his eyes full of emotion. And fate brought me to you. I think somehow, I needed to find you. You brought light to a darkness I didn't know how to face. Emma was silent for a moment, taking in the depth of Philip's words. Then, she held his hand, her fingers intertwining with his naturally. Maybe fate really does have plans we don't understand, she said softly. Over time, their friendship began to transform into something more. Philip felt more alive than ever by Emma's side, and she realized her heart raced every time he was near. The connection they shared was undeniable, and one day, without any warning, Philip kissed her gently. It was a shy kiss but full of promises. I think I'm in love with you, Emma, he confessed, his voice trembling. I didn't expect this, but I can't deny it. Emma smiled, her eyes filling with tears of happiness. And I'm in love with you, Philip. Since we became friends, you've shown me a side of you that's beautiful, vulnerable, and true. Their love blossomed with a natural beauty, and Philip's mansion, once cold and empty, began to feel like a real home. But there was still a ghost that Philip carried. The trauma of his sterility continued to haunt him, and Emma noticed. One night, while they were together in the mansion's garden, she brought up an idea she had been considering. Philip, have you ever thought that being a father doesn't have to be biological? She began gently. There are children who need love, a family. We could consider the idea of adoption. Philip was silent. The thought was delicate, and he had never considered this possibility. The fear of not being a real father consumed him. But Emma didn't pressure him. She knew it was a path he had to walk in his own time. As the weeks went by, Emma's strength and love began to make Philip reflect. He realized that the desire to be a father wasn't just about a biological legacy but about giving love, creating a family, and caring for someone who needed it. Emma supported him every step of the way, offering her understanding and patience. After many conversations and reflections, Philip and Emma decided to start the adoption process. It was a path full of bureaucratic hurdles, but the love and determination they shared guided them. They attended meetings, participated in interviews, and together, they dreamed of the day they would have a child in their home. Finally, after months of waiting and hoping, the day arrived. They adopted a 6-month-old boy, with big brown eyes that shone with curiosity. When they held the baby for the first time, Philip felt something transform inside him. The fear gave way to a pure and overwhelming love. "Hello, little one," Philip whispered, with tears in his eyes. "I am your father. I promise to protect and love you forever." Emma, by his side, felt her heart overflow with happiness. They had found the missing piece, the joy that completed the home they were building. Philip's mansion, once a symbol of loneliness and pain, was now full of laughter and the sound of a baby's footsteps growing day by day. Philip had never felt so fulfilled. Emma and he had formed a family, something he never thought was possible. They had turned pain into love, trauma into hope. The lesson from Philip and Emma's story is powerful. A person's true legacy is not left solely through blood but through love, connections, and compassion. Sometimes, life has unexpected ways of showing us what really matters. And when we open ourselves to these possibilities, we can discover a love that heals, transforms, and gives us a new reason to live. If this story of love, hope, and transformation touched your heart, leave a like and share it with someone you love. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more touching stories like this. And now, tell me, do you believe that love can heal even the deepest wounds? Leave your comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Together, we can spread more love and inspire hearts around the world. Until the next story.